As the Republican Party continues to relentlessly pursue niche, irrelevant culture war issues which will not produce a material benefit for anybody, anywhere, the Democratic Party under President Biden has done the exact opposite, and they pursue objectives which will benefit as many Americans as possible, liberal and progressive, but also, yes, conservative. And today gives one such example because the Biden administration has announced the first 10 prescription drugs, which will be the subject of price negotiations between Medicare and pharmaceutical companies, which will save the taxpayer billions upon billions of dollars over the next 10 years. But before we unpack all that, if you haven't yet, please hit that like, subscribe, and the alert bell. Maybe check out my Patreon. I'd appreciate the support. All right, folks, this is a big deal. This is one of the reasons why, despite the many faults of the Democratic Party, despite the many faults of Joe Biden, despite the imperfection of the progressive left, why I am ultimately a progressive Democrat rather than a regressively conservative Republican, why I am not a centrist. It's because when push comes to shove, Democrats and progressives generally have a better vision for this country and are more likely to deliver results. And today's announcement is just another example, because the Biden administration has announced the first 10 drugs, which will be the subject of the first rounds of price negotiations between Medicare and pharmaceutical companies for the first time in this nation's history, which is huge, okay? Presidential candidates have been talking about this for not only years, decades. President Clinton talked about it, I think, in like 1992 or 1993. He couldn't get it done. He's a Democrat. President Obama talked about it, but it wasn't a provision of the Affordable Care Act. The Affordable Care Act mentioned nothing about this. And that was a major ball drop there. I mean, they dropped the ball. And he talked about it in his second term, like late in his second term, and he couldn't get it done then either. And as a matter of fact, this is such a bipartisan issue, relatively speaking. Donald Trump talked about it. Donald Trump campaigned on this. This is one of the few campaign promises that he made, which was number one, coherent, two, moral, and three, just made sense, period. He talked about how the United States is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, purchaser of prescription drugs in the world, with quite a bit of leverage. And yet the government has failed over decades to exploit that leverage in negotiations with the private sector. And so he said, believe me, guys, when I get in office, we're going to negotiate like crazy. Believe me, nobody is a better negotiator than me, believe me. And then, of course, within his first week in office, he actually just dropped that promise. This is a headline from Vox. After meeting with pharmaceutical lobbyists, Trump drops promise to negotiate drug prices. The new plan is tax cuts and deregulation. Shocker, that is the, of course, Republican norm. So multiple presidents, Democrat and yes, Republican, have talked about it and have not gotten it done. But Joe Biden, Dark Brandon, did. Under his leadership, the Democratic Party was able to get it done. And why do I say the Democratic Party? Because it was part of the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, which was passed last year. And yes, this is really important too. That legislation only passed on a partisan vote. No Republican voted for the Inflation Reduction Act, which means they get none of the credit for this. And this is important because this may not seem like a big deal, but we all, as stewards of politics, as political students, all of us, we have to remember that this is going to be fodder, in addition to just being a good thing for the American people, for Medicare recipients, both liberal, progressive, and yes, conservative. This is also going to be fodder for campaigns and elections. And it's important that each and every one of us know that Republicans get zero credit for this. They get none, because not only did none of them vote for it, they actively lobbied and opposed it, okay? They get no credit for this. This is only because of President Biden and progressives and people in the Democratic Party that this thing is going into effect. So they get all the credit, okay? But let's get into the nitty-gritty. So first and foremost, I'm going to find it here. Actually, let's get into the list of drugs. I guarantee you I'm going to butcher the pronunciation here. But here are the 10 drugs subject to the initial talks this year, and I'm going to put my glasses on. We have Eliquis, made by Bristol Myers Squibb, which, by the way, sounds like a Harry Potter character, doesn't it? Bristol Myers Squibb is used to prevent blood clotting to reduce the risk of stroke. Jardiance, made by Boehringer Ingelheim, is used to lower blood sugar for people with type 2 diabetes. Xarelto, made by Johnson & Johnson, is used to prevent blood clotting to reduce the risk of stroke. Januvia, made by Merck, is used to lower blood sugar with type 2 diabetes. Farxiga, made by AstraZeneca, is used to treat type 2 diabetes. Entresto, made by Novartis, is used to treat certain types of heart failure. Enbrel, made by Amgen, is used to treat rheumatoid arthritis. Imbruvica, made by AbbVie, is used to treat different types of blood cancers. Stelara, made Stelara? Thought that was a video game. Stelara, made by Janssen, is used to treat Crohn's disease. I have an uncle with Crohn's disease, and it's been brutal. And Fiasp-Novolog, insulin's made by Novo Nordisk. Folks, this is huge. And again, this is the first 10, right? There are going to be more. But beyond that, let's talk some of the numbers. And this is a great CNBC article which discusses it. So first things first. The drug price talks are expected to save Medicare an estimated $98.5 billion over a decade, according to the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, okay? The negotiations are also expected to save money for people enrolled in Medicare who take advantage of 4 to 5 prescription drugs a month and increasingly face out-of-pocket costs that many struggle to afford, okay? Now, and this is a big one, okay? There's a little asterisk here, and it's right here. So drug makers have to sign agreements to join the negotiations by October 1st. CMS will then make the initial price offer to manufacturers on February 2024, and those companies have a month to accept or make a counteroffer, all right? The negotiations will end August 2024 with agreed-upon prices published on September 1st, 2024, and this is a big one, and this is part of the provision of the IRA. There's no getting around it. The reduced prices won't go into effect until 2026, okay? So it is coming. It's inevitable. But there's a 2-year delay because of the provision, unfortunately, that had to go into the IRA. If a drug maker declines to negotiate, it must either pay an excise tax of up to 95% of its medication U.S. sales or pull all of its products from the Medicare and Medicaid markets, which will be a colossal loss in revenue for them, all right? So, again, this is a case of the federal government throwing its weight around as the biggest, baddest you-know-what on the block, and it's good because it's going to produce material benefits for the American people. The pharmaceutical industry contends that the penalty can be as high as 1,900% of a drug's daily revenues, okay? Now, Big Pharma is not happy about this, and they weren't happy about this. I think they filed at least seven or something lawsuits against the Biden administration. So they're definitely not happy about this, and that's how you should know that the American people should be pleased, because the drug companies know that this is going to cut into their profits, and it's going to save the American people a pretty penny here. But folks, this is huge, okay? Even with the time delay, and even the fact that there's only 10 right now, we can't. Unfortunately, we don't have the political environment and the structure in the United States where we can instantly get I don't even want to say the help we want, the help people need, right? This is great. This is solid. This is a huge step forward. And Democrats and progressives and Biden get all the credit. Still not enough. It's still not the end goal. There's still work to be done, right? And there are little asterisks attached to it, again, like that 2-year delay, which is unfortunate. But it is a solid step forward. And this, again, illustrates the contrast. This is going on, and I know this isn't super sexy to a lot of people, right? Even though I try to make it. But this is a big deal. Your grandparents, your older parents, perhaps even you, depending on your age. I mean, maybe you're looking down the door of potentially facing these prices as a Medicare recipient. This is going to affect so many people, and again, not just liberals, not just progressives, but conservatives, red states, blue states. This is going to affect people in every state of every political persuasion. And this is the stark contrast between a serious, if flawed, and it is flawed, but a serious governing party and a governing wing of politics like progressives, the Democratic Party and President Biden, compared to the clown show that is the Republican Party, which is interested in worrying about your gas stoves. The Biden administration's coming for your gas stoves, and trying to prop up a 4 times indicted criminal and malignant narcissist pathological liar like Donald Trump. This is where the priorities are, and this is why, again, I say I'm not a centrist, and I can't be a conservative, and you shouldn't be either of those things either, because both sides, they're not equal. They're just not. They are not equal. There are manifestly substantive, meaningful differences between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, between the progressive left and the progressive right. And stuff like this goes a long way to reestablishing, once again, that fact.